Hey everybody, welcome to the channel. Michael Noland here, and tonight we start a brand new series, and of course that'll be the Beatles story, handled in much the same way that I handle my Led Zeppelin series, Led Zeppelin Decoded. We'll be dropping in on the Beatles at different portions of their career to get a better insight of exactly how this band came into being and how they did, well, basically, the impossible. All right, so we've all heard the old saying, no man is an island, and nothing could be truer when it comes to a band in rock and roll. No one band has ever done it all on their own, and that includes the mighty Led Zeppelin as well as the Beatles themselves. Now, both of these bands have one thing in common, and that is they had a team behind them. In the case of Led Zeppelin, a smaller, more intimate team, and in the case of the Beatles, a larger, more evolving team as the band progressed. Of course, it goes without saying, the vast majority of the talent, the vast majority of the responsibility of what we have come to know as Beatles music is on the Fab Four themselves. With the magnificent songwriting capabilities of John Lennon and Paul McCartney at first, then later George Harrison, this band was an embarrassment of riches when it came to musicianship, songwriting capabilities, and the ability to get it all on record. And if you've seen my video on my top 5 favorite drummers in rock and roll, again, my top 5 favorite drummers, not necessarily the drummers who were the most technical. Ringo Starr favored quite highly on that list. And so keep that in mind as we go on in this series. Even Ringo was indispensable to the sound that the Beatles created for all of us. But you know, even the mighty Beatles would have to have a team behind them. They would have to have a group of people who could expose them to the world at large. Now you have to understand, even before the Beatles met their manager, Brian Epstein, they already had a couple of key members to the team with them at that time. Of course, I'm talking about Neil Aspinall and Mal Evans. You know, throughout the Beatles' entire touring years, this was, for the most part, their entire road crew. There's footage of the band themselves reconfiguring Ringo's drum set in between songs just so the band could revolve and face everybody in an arena early in their careers. You see, for the most part, in 1964, when the Beatles were truly world phenomena, rock and roll was still in its infancy for the most part. In fact, it was the Beatles that created stadium rock in 1965 when they played Shea Stadium. Here they set a world record that would be the beginning template of world record breakers in the future. With over 55,000 attendees, Shea Stadium became the very first stadium rock concert, basically giving the Beatles bragging rights of inventing the stadium rock concert. Sure, the band was amplified by one of the worst PA systems that you could possibly ask for, and they were playing brand new 100-watt amps. 55,000 people attending your concert, and you were playing your guitar through an amp that is approximately 1/12 as powerful as this amp sitting behind me. This is a PA system, 1,200 watts, folks. And the Beatles' most powerful amp they had on stage was 100 watts. Amazing. But you know, we have to go back before they ever got to that point. Back to the time of the Cavern Club. This is the time where the Beatles were just getting hot. They had hundreds of fans, and they obtained those fans all on their own steam, all based on their own live playing there at the Cavern Club. These were the days that Neil Aspinall and Mal Evans would lug equipment all around, usually in a broken down van, and the Beatles rushing from the Cavern to another quick stop and back to the Cavern. It was a heady time. But they had taken that pretty much as far as they could. They needed somebody who saw them for what they could potentially be. And of course, that key member to the Beatle Machine turned out to be Brian Epstein. Now, looking back on Brian Epstein's total career, it's really easy to say he made more than his fair share of financial mistakes concerning the Beatles. But you know, with Brian Epstein, it's what he did right that put him in the history books. You see, he saw the talent. He knew this band had what it took to really drive an audience, but they were misrepresenting themselves in his head. He felt that on stage their attire was untucked, unkempt, and the fact that they would smoke and cuss on stage, he felt was a little bit rough around the edges. It was he who had this vision. He wanted to present them to the world in such a way that they wouldn't alienate possible fans and listeners. It was his idea to clean them up, put them in suits, and present them in a brand new way. Now, years later in Rolling Stone, John Lennon claimed that he and George Harrison didn't like being taken to the tailors. But Paul McCartney has several times since then said, no. When the Beatles decided to smarten up, all of them were pretty much right in line and were excited about the new look. But it wasn't just a quick trip to any tailor. You see, it was Douglas Millings who were the Beatles' tailor. He designed over 500 Beatle outfits for them, and this was the visual aspect that was presented to the world. And what about Anello and David, who designed the Beatle boot? You know, that whole design was ingenious. What they did was take a Cuban-style heel and attach it to a boot with a pointed toe that was closer to a flamenco dancer. These boots, along with those straight-legged trousers, really presented the Beatles in a sharp and yet distinctive rock and roll look that no one had ever quite seen before. You know, this shows us there was a lot of pre-thought into exactly how the Beatles would be presented visually, with carefully chosen people like Robert Fraser to photograph the Beatles, not only for promotional material, but for their actual albums up to and including the magnificent Rubber Soul cover, all the way to Ivor Albator, the guy who designed the Beatle logo. You know, the Beatle logo with the famous centered drop T. You know, the whole story behind that was Ringo had just purchased himself a brand new set of drums, and he wanted to have a cover for it with the name Ludwig. There weren't any available, and so it was only because of that that Ivor designed the Beatles logo, and it is perfect. It's symmetrical, it gets the point across, you never forget it, you don't think about it, but it's there and it's part of their entire branding. All right, so much for the pre-Fab Four. Those aspects would only carry any group of individuals so far. They might look sharp, they look good on their albums, they look good on magazine covers, but could they play? Brian Epstein shopped the Beatles around London, trying to get a record deal for them, almost like he was a Fuller Brush salesman. He hit everybody, but it was almost a last-ditch effort when he finally met up with George Martin. Now, George Martin up to this point had primarily produced comedy records. He wasn't known as a producer of music, but he was a classically trained musician, and he understood arranging, and he wanted to expand on what he had done as a producer. When he first gathered the Beatles in Abbey Road and listened to them as a unit, he felt they were very rough around the edges, but there was just something there. He would then later that evening discuss with Norman Smith, another key figure in the Beatle Machine, on just how they sounded. There was something there, they both agreed, and they had this quirky kind of attitude that just seemed to manifest itself whenever all four of these guys were together. Now, George Martin didn't know what he was going to do with them. You have to understand, he was listening to them, and there was at least 3 of them that sang really well. He even considered for a short while putting George Harrison up front as the lead vocalist. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized, wait a minute, this group is way too talented. Let's just try them on and let whoever sings the song best do it per song. You know, with this single decision, George Martin showed that he saw with the Beatles what all other record companies hadn't even begun to see. It was from this point that him and Norman Smith, an engineer, by the way, who was an expert in getting the room's sound perfect, started working with the Beatles. Here's where, for the first time, a carving out of that Beatles sound started to occur. By the end of Norman Smith's tenure, which included their first album through Rubber Soul, the Beatles had traveled miles. But you know, it was at this point that Norman Smith was promoted to producer, and so that opened up a position for a new Beatle engineer. And this is where Geoff Emerick entered the picture. Now, Geoff Emerick had been around the Beatle picture prior to this, but he had been just in a few of their recordings, and of course he was paying attention to what Norman Smith did. Norman Smith teaching Geoff Emerick a whole lot about his craft. Of course, Geoff Emerick broke every recording rule, it seems like, and created new recording rules that would be followed for years after. Him, along with Ken Townsend, Phil McDonald, Glenn Johns, Alan Parsons, each supplying something new when the Beatles needed it. All of this, and of course with other projects such as their films, them being able to get Dick Lester to direct their two most famous and most successful films, almost seemed like they had a lucky charm in their midst the whole time. Even the writer Alan Owens in the first film showing he had a real insight to at least their basic personalities. All of these people that I've mentioned in this video were all brilliant answers to an already brilliant core band, each of them adding their own stroke to the total Beatle picture. The music almost demanded new recording techniques, and they would need team members who could actually make that happen. All right, so that's the video for tonight. We're just introducing the idea of exactly what made the Beatles who they were. In our very next episode, we'll drop into the Beatles story from another aspect. In the meantime, I've finished up writing my very next Led Zeppelin Decoded video. That should be out in the next couple of days. You know, I want to thank each and every brand new subscriber. Welcome to the tribe. I want to thank each and every one of our tribal members who have shared our videos. This has been wonderful for channel growth, and I want to give you a big thank you. The names you're seeing in front of me are brand new subscribers. I'm still trying to catch up. The channel has had such a tremendous amount of growth. It'll still take me a few videos to catch up, but I will get to all of you eventually. If you liked tonight's video, please give us a thumbs up. It helps the YouTube algorithm better recognize the channel, and that way the video gets recommended to a wider audience. All right, so that about covers it for tonight. I'm Michael Noland. This, of course, is The Bottom Line, and I'll see you in my next video.